Jake Monroe, a 38-year-old software engineer, had always considered himself a lucky man. His wife, Emily, was stunning, smart, and the mother of their 2 kids, Ava and Liam. She was the type of woman who could light up a room with her laugh, and for years, that laugh had been his greatest comfort. Their life together wasn't perfect, but whose was? Jake worked long hours in tech, pulling late nights to keep their suburban life running smoothly. Emily managed the chaos at home with the kids, juggling school pickups, grocery runs, and yoga classes. It was a partnership, and while the sparks of their early romance had dimmed, Jake never doubted their love. Life had a way of settling into routine. Dinners became quiet, rushed affairs between work and bedtime stories. Date nights turned into Netflix binges on the couch. And intimacy? Well, that had gone from spontaneous to scheduled, slipping further into the background with each passing year. But Jake didn't mind. He figured this was just what marriage looked like after a decade and 2 kids. Still, he tried to make an effort. Just the other week, he'd surprised Emily with her favorite flowers, white lilies. She had smiled, thanked him, and placed them in a vase on the counter. But later that evening, Jake found them sitting in the corner of the kitchen, forgotten, wilting in the shadows. The gesture, though small, had stung. That Monday evening, the kids were upstairs getting ready for bed. Jake was tidying up the kitchen while Emily folded laundry in the living room. Her phone buzzed on the counter, its screen lighting up in the dim room. He glanced at it without thinking, a harmless habit of years spent together. But then his eyes caught the name, Mike, Yoga. Jake furrowed his brow. Mike? He didn't remember Emily ever mentioning a Mike from yoga. Curious, he reached for the phone, telling himself he was just being nosy. The preview of the text froze him in place. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Missing your touch already. His heart hammered in his chest. Missing your touch. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable heavier than the last. For a moment, he stood there, clutching the phone, willing himself to believe it was a mistake. Maybe it was an innocent joke, something taken out of context. But something deep in his gut told him otherwise. Slowly, almost mechanically, Jake swiped to unlock the phone. The thread of messages scrolled into view, a damning timeline of betrayal laid bare in the glow of the screen. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. You bring out a side of me I didn't know existed. I wish we didn't have to sneak around like this. One day, maybe. Jake's breath hitched as he read on. The exchanges stretched back for months, filled with late-night confessions, flirty banter, and plans for secret meetings. The tone was unmistakable. These weren't the words of a platonic friendship. The intimacy was palpable, radiating off the screen like a slap to the face. He scrolled further, his stomach twisting with each new revelation. Dates and times jumped out at him, aligning with moments Emily had claimed she was at the gym or out running errands. Even worse, there were references to their home, his home. Jake's mind raced, piecing together moments he'd dismissed as routine, the extra yoga classes, the sudden interest in her appearance, the new lingerie he'd assumed was for him but had never seen her wear. His hands trembled as he set the phone back on the counter, its screen going dark as if it had taken a bow after delivering its devastating performance. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, suffocating. Jake leaned against the counter, struggling to steady his breathing. How had he not seen this? How had he been so blind? A voice broke the silence, pulling him back to reality. Jake. Emily called from the living room. Can you grab the laundry basket when you're done in there? He swallowed hard, his mind spinning. For a split second, he considered walking into the living room, confronting her with the phone in hand, demanding an explanation. But as he took a shaky breath, he realized he wasn't ready. He needed time to think, to process. Charging in now wouldn't give him answers, it would only give her time to cover her tracks. Yeah, he called back, forcing an even tone. I'll bring it in a minute. Emily didn't press him, and the sounds of the kids giggling upstairs filled the silence once more. Jake stared at the phone on the counter, a Pandora's box of lies he hadn't asked to open. For the first time in his marriage, Jake Monroe wasn't sure if he knew the woman he had pledged his life to. The kids were asleep, their soft breathing filtering through the baby monitor in the kitchen. Jake sat at the dining table, Emily's phone on the polished surface in front of him, its dark screen a silent reminder of the storm brewing inside him. He heard Emily moving in the living room, the rhythmic folding of laundry, the occasional rustle of fabric. Normal, routine. It made him sick. Gathering his courage, he picked up the phone and walked into the living room. Emily looked up, surprised to see him standing there with such an intense expression. "Jake," she said, setting down a neatly folded towel. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." He held up her phone, his hand trembling despite his best effort to stay calm. "Who's Mike?" Her brow furrowed, and she tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Mike?" she repeated. "You mean from yoga?" "Yes, Emily." "Mike from yoga," Jake said, his voice flat. "What's going on between you two?" Her laugh was forced, light but hollow. "What?" "Nothing's going on, Jake. He's just a guy from class. Sometimes we talk after sessions, that's all." She reached for the phone, but Jake stepped back, holding it out of her reach. "Don't," he warned, his voice sharper now. "Don't lie to me." Emily froze, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "I read the messages, Emily. All of them." Her mouth opened, then closed, her cheeks flushing. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, might try to spin some fantastical tale. But something in Jake's expression must have told her it was useless. She sighed, crossing her arms defensively. "Jake, you're making this a bigger deal than it is. Those messages don't mean anything. Mike's just missing your touch," Jake interrupted, his voice rising. "I can't stop thinking about you. That doesn't mean anything. Don't insult my intelligence, Emily." Her face hardened, and the mask of innocence she'd been trying to maintain cracked. "Fine," she snapped, throwing up her hands. "Yes, I've been seeing him. Is that what you want to hear? Are you happy now?" Jake recoiled as if slapped. The weight of her admission hit him like a punch to the gut, but her words didn't stop there. "And you know what? It's not all my fault," she continued, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and defensiveness. "Do you even know how lonely I've felt? How distant you've been? You're always working, always tired, and when you are home, it's like you're not even here. You don't make me feel loved anymore, Jake. You don't even see me." He stared at her, stunned into silence. Her words echoed in his mind, twisting into cruel shapes. Emily, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, was blaming him for her betrayal. "I don't make you feel loved," he finally managed, his voice low and raw. "Do you have any idea what I do every day? I work late, I come home exhausted, and I still try. I try for you, for Ava, for Liam. And you," his voice broke, and he turned away, running a hand through his hair. Emily didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but no less defensive. "I'm not saying it's right. I needed something more, Jake. Something you weren't giving me." Jake turned back to her, his eyes burning with disbelief. "So, what? You found it with him? While I was here, holding this family together, you were sneaking around with Mike from yoga? That's your solution?" Emily looked away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she muttered. "You didn't plan for it?" Jake let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't plan for it, but you sure made time for it, didn't you? While I was here with the kids, thinking we were okay, you were out, doing what? Did you ever think about how this would affect them?" About what happens when they find out what you've done. Jake, keep your voice down, Emily hissed, glancing toward the staircase. Oh, now you're worried about the kids. Jake shot back. Now you care about how they'll feel. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Jake's chest heaved with the effort of holding back tears. Emily's face was pale, her lips pressed into a tight line. Finally, Jake couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his keys from the counter, his movements quick and jerky. Where are you going? Emily asked, her voice shaking now. Out, he said simply. Jake, we need to talk about this, she pleaded, taking a step toward him. Talk about what? He shot back, turning to face her. You've already said it all, Emily. You've said enough. Before she could respond, he yanked open the front door and slammed it behind him. The sound reverberated through the quiet neighborhood as Jake climbed into his car and started the engine. He drove aimlessly through the dark streets, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of anger, pain, and disbelief. Memories of their life together flashed before his eyes, their wedding day, the births of their children, the quiet night spent dreaming about their future. All of it felt tainted now, overshadowed by her betrayal. Eventually, he pulled into an empty parking lot, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across his dashboard. Jake turned off the engine and sat in the silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The weight of everything crashed down on him at once, and for the first time that night, Jake allowed himself to cry. Jake sat in the dim light of the parking lot for hours that night, the weight of Emily's betrayal crushing him. The ache in his chest was unbearable, but as the tears subsided, a steely resolve began to take shape. He couldn't erase what had happened, but he could take control of what came next. He wouldn't lash out impulsively or let his emotions cloud his judgment. No, he would handle this with precision, ensuring Emily and her lover faced the consequences of their deceit. By dawn, Jake had a plan. He started by reaching out to his best friend, Marcus, a fellow software engineer who had always been a voice of reason in Jake's life. Marcus listened intently as Jake recounted everything, the messages, the confrontation, Emily's excuses. You need proof, Marcus said firmly. If this goes to court, hearsay won't cut it. Get someone to document everything. That way, when the time comes, you're not the one caught off guard. Jake nodded, realizing Marcus was right. He needed to approach this like a project at work, meticulously and with an end goal in mind. After a quick Google search and a few phone calls, Jake found a reputable private investigator named Sam Whitaker. Sam was a former police detective with a reputation for thoroughness and discretion. The next morning, Jake met with Sam at a small cafe on the edge of town. Over coffee, he laid everything out, handing over copies of the texts he had seen on Emily's phone. I need to know where they're meeting, how often, and any other details you can uncover, Jake said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Sam nodded, sliding the papers into a folder. Leave it to me. I'll get you what you need. In the meantime, Jake returned home and resolved to play the role of the doting husband. Emily greeted him cautiously, her eyes searching his for signs of lingering anger. But Jake had mastered his emotions, masking his pain with an air of calm. I'm sorry about last night, he said softly, his tone measured. I need some time to process everything. But I don't want the kids to feel like anything's wrong. Emily blinked, clearly caught off guard by his sudden change in demeanor. Of course, she said quickly. I want to work through this too. Jake forced a smile. Good. Let's focus on the kids for now. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake fell into a pattern of normalcy. He played with Ava and Liam, helped with homework, and even planned a family outing to the zoo. Emily, for her part, seemed to believe his act, relaxing into the illusion that their life was returning to normal. But while Jake maintained the facade at home, Sam was hard at work. Every few days, the investigator sent updates. The first was a series of photos of Emily and Mike meeting at a coffee shop, their heads bent close together, hands brushing in ways that spoke of more than friendship. The next update was worse, grainy photos of Emily and Mike entering a boutique hotel, their expressions giddy and carefree. Jake stared at the images for hours that night, his hands trembling as he traced the outline of Emily's face on the screen. As the evidence piled up, so did Jake's resolve. He wanted to confront her again, to scream and demand answers, but he knew the timing wasn't right. He needed every piece of the puzzle in place first. Then came the final straw. Sam called one afternoon, his voice grim. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he began. Jake's heart sank. "What is it?" "Emily used your joint account to book a weekend at a luxury spa with Mike. She claimed it was a work retreat." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "You're sure?" "Positive. I've got the receipts, emails, and photos to back it up." Jake hung up and stared at the phone in his hand, a wave of fury washing over him. She hadn't just betrayed him emotionally, she had used their family's money to fund her affair. It was the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. That evening, as Emily chatted with Ava about an upcoming school play, Jake watched her from across the room. She looked so normal, so untroubled. The sight of her smiling face, knowing what he now knew, made his stomach churn. Jake slipped upstairs, locking himself in their bedroom. He spread the evidence across the bed, methodically sorting through photos, receipts, and texts. The picture it painted was undeniable. Emily hadn't just made a mistake, she had made choices, calculated, repeated choices to lie, to steal, to betray. By the time he returned downstairs, his decision was made. Jake would no longer allow Emily and Mike to manipulate and humiliate him. He had the truth on his side, and he intended to use it. For now, though, he played his part, nodding along as Emily recounted her day and tucking the kids into bed with a kiss. But as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Jake felt a quiet determination settle over him. Emily thought she had gotten away with her lies. She had no idea the storm that was coming. The backyard was alive with laughter and cheer. Streamers hung from the fence, balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, and Ava's favorite music played softly in the background. The smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs wafted through the air as Jake moved among the guests, shaking hands and making small talk. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, a picture-perfect birthday party for their little girl. But Jake's heart raced with anticipation. Today wasn't just a celebration for Ava, it was the day everything would change. Emily was in her element, flitting from guest to guest, her laugh ringing out like chimes. She looked radiant in a sundress, her hair perfectly styled, her smile bright. Jake marveled at her ability to pretend everything was fine, as if the past months of betrayal hadn't happened. He had planned this moment meticulously, choosing Ava's birthday for a reason. Their closest friends and family were here, the people who had supported them throughout their marriage. Emily thrived on appearances, crafting an image of their perfect life. Jake intended to shatter that illusion in a way she would never forget. As the afternoon wore on, Jake's opportunity arrived. The cake, a towering confection decorated with rainbows and unicorns, was brought out to a round of applause. Ava squealed with delight as Emily guided her to the head of the table. Jake cleared his throat, stepping forward with the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. "Before we sing happy birthday and cut the cake, I want to say a few words." Emily turned to him, her smile faltering slightly. She was used to Jake being reserved, not one for public displays. Jake smiled at Ava, his tone warm. "Ava, you're the light of my life. Every day, you make me proud to be your dad, and I love you more than anything in this world." The guests cooed, and Ava beamed. Then Jake's tone shifted, sharpening like the edge of a blade. "This celebration, though, isn't just for Ava. It's also a farewell. Confusion flickered across Emily's face. She tilted her head slightly, her smile stiffening. "Jake, what are you?" He held up a hand to silence her. "Emily, you've been unfaithful," he said, his voice ringing out over the crowd. Gasps rippled through the gathering, the cheerful atmosphere evaporating in an instant. Emily's face went pale. "Jake, stop," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. But he ignored her, pulling a folder from the table beside him. He opened it, revealing the evidence Sam had gathered: photos, receipts, texts, printed neatly and organized. He handed the folder to Emily, his hand steady. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth," Jake said, his gaze locking on hers. "While I've been working to provide for our family, you've been sneaking around with Mike. You used our money to fund your affair, lied to me, and betrayed our marriage." The crowd was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Emily clutched the folder, her hands trembling as she stared at the damning evidence inside. Jake took a deep breath, his next words cold and deliberate. "I filed for divorce. And Mike, if you're listening, you can have her." The silence broke with murmurs and whispers as the guests processed what had just happened. Emily's eyes darted around the backyard, panic and humiliation written all over her face. "How could you do this here?" she finally spat, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "At Ava's birthday party? In front of everyone?" Jake met her gaze, unflinching. "Because you've been hiding behind these people for too long, Emily. Pretending to be someone you're not. I'm done protecting your lies." Ava, oblivious to the drama, tugged on Jake's sleeve. "Daddy, can we cut the cake now?" Jake knelt down, his expression softening as he looked at his daughter. "Of course, sweetheart." The guests sang happy birthday, their voices strained with awkwardness, but Ava didn't seem to notice. As she blew out her candles, Jake's heart ached for her innocence, for the way this moment would stay with her, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Emily stood frozen, the folder clutched to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, but Jake felt no pity. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. After the party, as the guests began to trickle out, Jake stood near the gate, thanking them for coming. Many avoided eye contact, their expressions a mix of sympathy and discomfort. A few muttered words of support, patting him on the shoulder as they left. Emily retreated inside, her sobs audible through the open window. But Jake didn't follow her. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity, of purpose. He had taken the first step toward reclaiming his life, and he wasn't looking back. As the sun set and the backyard emptied, Jake sat alone at the picnic table, the remnants of the party scattered around him. He watched Ava and Liam chase fireflies in the twilight, their laughter a balm for his wounded heart. Emily's betrayal had broken something in him, but it hadn't destroyed him. He still had his children, his dignity, and the knowledge that he had done what was right. For now, that was enough. The aftermath of the birthday party felt like the wreckage left after a hurricane. Emily broke down the moment the last guest left, sobbing uncontrollably in the living room. Her cries echoed through the house, but Jake didn't falter. "You've destroyed everything," she wailed, clutching the damning folder to her chest like it was her last lifeline. "No, Emily," Jake replied, his voice calm but unyielding. "You destroyed everything when you decided our family wasn't enough for you." Her tears turned to pleading. "Please, Jake, we can fix this. I'll end it with Mike, I swear. Just give me another chance. Think about the kids. Think about what this will do to them." "I am thinking about the kids," he said firmly. "That's why I'm leaving. They deserve better than this. And so do I." Emily fell silent, her sobs quieting into hiccups. For a moment, Jake thought she might lash out, but instead, she sank onto the couch, defeated. The next morning, Jake packed his things. He moved quickly, not wanting to drag out the inevitable. Ava and Liam were confused but cooperative as Jake explained that they would be staying with him for a while. "Is Mommy coming too?" Ava asked, clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn. "No, sweetie," Jake said gently. "Mommy needs some time to think. But you'll still see her, okay?" The truth tasted bitter in his mouth, but Jake refused to lie to his kids. Emily watched them leave from the front door, her tear-streaked face etched with regret. She didn't say a word. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life unraveled. News of her affair spread quickly through their tight-knit community, fueled by whispers from guests at Ava's party. Friends who once admired Emily for her grace and poise now avoided her, their polite smiles turning to awkward nods when they crossed paths at the grocery store. Her relationship with Mike crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Whatever thrill their affair once held was replaced by tension and blame. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, Mike had moved on, leaving Emily to face her shattered reputation alone. Jake, meanwhile, found a new rhythm as a single dad. His days were a whirlwind of school drop-offs, soccer practices, and late-night science projects. The adjustment wasn't easy, but he threw himself into his new role with the same determination that had carried him through the darkest moments of his life. Ava and Liam adapted surprisingly well. They missed their mother, but they thrived in the stability Jake provided. Their laughter filled the small rental house Jake had moved into, their giggles echoing down the hallway as they chased each other with toy swords. Jake's work became his sanctuary. He poured his energy into projects, earning a promotion that allowed him to work from home more often. It was tiring but rewarding, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of control over his life. Months passed, and Emily's attempts to reconcile became fewer and farther between. At first, she called and texted constantly, begging Jake to forgive her. But as the reality of their separation sank in, her pleas turned to bitter accusations. "You've ruined me," she spat during one particularly heated phone call. "No, Emily," Jake replied evenly. "You did that to yourself." The kids spent weekends with Emily, though Jake insisted on supervised visits at first. Slowly, they found a balance, but the distance between them remained vast and unbridgeable. One evening, as Jake watched Ava and Liam build a pillow fort in the living room, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He couldn't deny that the public nature of his confrontation with Emily had been calculated. He wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the pain she had caused. But had it been too much? He thought about the whispers he still heard at school events and the way Emily avoided his gaze when they crossed paths. He wondered if he could have handled things differently, more privately, with less collateral damage. Then Ava's laughter rang out, pure and joyful, as Liam toppled the pillow fort with dramatic flair. Jake smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He hadn't been perfect, but he had done what he thought was right, for himself, for his kids, and for the life they were building together.